1,500 years ere seed sown. Truth was twisted, its seeds were grown. Break the lies, spark the mission. Welcome to Quranic Inquisition.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Peace of the Lord to all of you. Shalom, assalamu alaikum, namaste. Welcome to the show. Today we have quite a bombastic topic to discuss. And for those who have been following on these recent debates and things that have happened around and they are familiar with the words, those watching who are nomos are absolutely love what we've got for you today. Those who are yesmos, they are absolutely going to hate it. But either way, let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, because it's quite an important topic. So with us, as always, Kash. Hello, Kash. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, JC. And you?
I'm very well. Are you excited about this?
Yeah, so the question we're putting forward today is very pointed. Who, not what is Mecca, but who is Mecca? And we'll see very shortly why that framing is appropriate. But before we do that, JC, would you like to introduce this concept?
Yes, actually, we are going to first have a very quick listen to one part from this debate that happened the other day, yes, because they actually talked about Makkah. So we're going to listen to Jay Smith for 1 minute, exactly as is there in the timer. And that is going to show very clearly why we're introducing this topic and why there is a problem with the historical understanding of Makkah. Then at the end of the show, we will play the rest of the other minute, which is with Raymond Ibrahim, because he actually puts forward a very, very important question, and one that it is not easily answered. But maybe we are now getting closer to the answer to that very important question. So we will do Raymond Ibrahim at the end. But for now, let's just listen for a moment what Jay Smith has to say about Makkah.
Yeah, you're really caught into the maps. Forget about the maps, okay? The maps are damaging. Why don't you go back to what Patricia Crone said in Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam in 1987? Now, this woman reads and writes 15 languages, which you and I cannot do. So she went back to all the original documents. She wanted to find any reference to Mecca. She went to the Assyrians. She couldn't find any reference. She went to the Babylonians. She went to the Romans. She went to the Persians. Couldn't find any reference from any of those civilizations. Remember, she reads all of their languages. So then she decided, well, let's look at people that were closer. So she went to the Nabateans up in the north, couldn't find any reference to Mecca. She went to the Nubians over in the west, couldn't find any reference. She went to the Himyarites in the south. All these are surrounding Mecca and couldn't find any reference to any of these from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, all the way up to the 8th century. That says something right there. If you can't find any reference to this city, and yet you can find all kinds of references to Sana'a and to Najran and to Yathrib and Taif and Khaybar and Tabuk and all these other insignificant towns. That's a problem, and that's why you have to answer that one.
Thank you very much, Jay.
Can I respond to that or no?
No, you lost your chance.
Okay.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so I wanted to actually leave that part as well. And kudos to Hadun Tash. She did an amazing job during that debate. And I think I will watch any single debate where she's moderating. I think she does that going forward, because it was a lot of fun. She did a great job. So what Jay Smith has said is Patricia Crone read all of these documents from all of those civilizations looking for Makkah, and nobody spoke about them. Of course. Now, for the particularly Christian apologists who say, no, but this thing was real, it's just that they have fabricated stuff, they need to have a place where Muhammad was born and where all of those things happen. But there wasn't any references about this city. So the city is just not found. What is going on? So the only way to then make the standard Islamic narrative work is to actually say, well, the standard Islamic narrative is fine. It's fine, but the city was actually not very, very big, which then means the standard Islamic narrative is also false, because it says that the city was very big, and during the Battle of Badr, they got 1,000 people from Makkah and so on. So there must be a reference, but nobody has found it. That's the thing. A city where everything began should have been very popular, very famous. And then you have all of these competing theories or theses. For example, Dan Gibson says, okay, so everything began in Petra, and they just made a mistake with the script, and then it became Makkah, but it wasn't Makkah. It was actually Petra, Baka, all of those things. Then you have other people like Thomas Alexander, who puts forward, hey, maybe the city is actually all the way in Uzbekistan. Then there are people saying, hang on a minute, I think the city has to be somewhere in Iraq because of all of the other references that we have found with inscriptions and stuff. And everybody keeps looking for the city, but there is no city. Nobody has actually found it. So the logical thing to do would really be, hang on a minute. The standard Islamic narrative is talking about a city, and we are looking for it in the world, and we cannot find it from before Islam, even though it should be there. That then poses a very important question. What came first? The word Makkah in the Quran, which is the only reference that we have in the 7th century, Makkah, or the city? Of course, the standard Islamic narrative says there was the city actually was there in the Hijaz and so on, and that's actually what gave birth to Muhammad and then to the Quran and so on. But why are we assuming that? The word Makkah appears only once in the Quran. So is it possible that that word never meant Makkah? It never meant a city. It had nothing to do with the standard Islamic narrative. It had nothing to do with Muhammad. It was simply a word, and that word was mistranslated. As we have seen in the channel, in many, many different occasions, they keep hiding stuff, such as the word baptism, such as the whole problem with backbone and the ribs. We've seen Ar-Rahman, we've seen a lot of stuff. Is it possible they had to hide a word? As a result, a new city was created in the book, and subsequently, that city was recreated in the world. So we think that's actually what happened, cutting a very long story very short, and Kash is going to actually show us possibilities of what that original word could have been and what they were trying to hide, which then became the only instance of Makkah in the Quran. So Kash, over to you. If you want to actually explain the white paper style that we are doing this as.
Yeah, so I'm gonna present this as a white paper, of course, because I am not confident about every single rendering I have made. However, the gist is there, and it's most certainly directionally correct. But before we get into the one verse, which is Surah 48, Ayah 24, where we see this orthographic combination of characters that make this word, which is pronounced Makkah, although in the earliest orthography, it's very clear that the final character is a T, Makat, not an H. And then there's this whole thing about, yeah, sure, it's a T, but we pronounce it as an H, and it's like, okay, sure, whatever you say, right? So that's one problem. But anyway, so before we go into that, I'm going to provide a little bit of context by reading through a parable from the New Testament. This is the parable of the tenants. We're going to read through it all. That way we have the context here. I'm sure many people are already well familiar with this. However, we're going to go through it anyway. So we read. I think this is from Matthew. I forget the chapter. That's pretty bad. I should have kept it here, but it can be found. So we start at verse 33. We read, "Here another parable. There was a master of a house who planted a vineyard and put up a fence around it, and dug a winepress in it, and built a tower, and leased it to tenants, and went into another country. When the season for fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the tenants to get his fruit. And the tenants took his servants, and beat one, killed another, and stoned another. Again, he sent other servants, more than the first, and they did the same to them. Finally, he sent his son to them, saying, 'They will respect my son.' But when the tenants saw the son, and they said to themselves, 'This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and have his inheritance.' And they took him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. When, therefore, the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants?" So he's asking the crowd here. This is Christ speaking. "They said to him, 'He will put those wretches to a miserable death, and then let out the vineyard to other tenants, who will give him the fruits in their seasons.' Jesus said to them, 'Have you never read in the scriptures, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone? This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore, I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people producing its fruits. And the one who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces. And when it falls on anyone, it will crush him. When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived that he was speaking about them. And although they were seeking to arrest him, they feared the crowds, because they held him to be a prophet. So this parable is very easily understood as a parable about the relationship between Israel and God, where the vineyard represents Israel. The tenants are Israel. How would I phrase this? What's the best way to frame it? Essentially, the tenants were there to take care of the produce and the harvest, which is symbolic, right? And that the servants that were sent by God are then the prophets, who were then killed by the Israelites. And then it culminates in the sending of God's Son, which is obviously Christ, speaking about himself, and prophetically speaking about them killing him. And then the result of that will be that the rights over the vineyard are to be given to others who will actually produce its fruits. And this is then like the Pharisees, we read then in 45 and 46, how the Pharisees knew that this was speaking about them. So this is the context. I want to put this forward in the sense to have it in the back of your mind of this imagery, of this concept, of this idea, where there's this question of inheritance, where the son is the heir, right? And if we kill the son, maybe then we can take it, we can defraud him, we can take his inheritance from him. So that's just going to be, I'm putting that there for context. And then we're going to now start to go through Surah 48, Ayah 24, where we see this word Makkah and see what we can make from it. So the way, this is a white paper, what I'm doing here is I'm simply reading the, like let's say the Rasim. I'm reading that. I'm accepting for the most part the diacritics and such, right? So the Hafs rendering essentially. And I'm simply reading it as a Syriac text. So I'm looking at lexicons from Syriac and Aramaic, as well as looking at the Masoretic text in terms of the Hebrew Old Testament to see in that context maybe if something is being drawn upon too. So that's the framework. So we're going to work through the verse with that idea in mind and see what we find.
Actually, if I can just as well like to add a little bit of to what you said, that so the frame is, if the city is actually not attested in real time in the world, in any sources, until after the book has appeared, so maybe, just maybe, the book doesn't contain that word. It was one fabrication, like it happens with the Masjid al-Haram, Masjid al-Aqsa, and quite a few other things. So that is the framing. Is it possible that since it appears only once, it is part of the whole conspiracy and the word is something else? And then it became a city in the world. And if that's the case, what could the original word actually be? So just actually adding a couple of extra words to what Kasia said.
Right, like the word is there. We have the word orthographically attested in this very early source, this 7th century source that is the Quranic text, right? So we have the orthography, we have the word there. The question is it a city that is transliterated like Makkah as a proper name of a city? That's what we're looking for. So we're starting, here is the verse in question. I've highlighted to make it very clear between translations what which words correspond to which Arabic words, and we'll see that as we move along. But for now, I'm going to read through a couple examples. So Sahih International renders this verse, and it is he who withheld their hands from you and your hands from them within, and in brackets, the area of Makkah, after he caused you to overcome them, and Allah, and ever Allah is of what you do seeing. The crucial things are the two words we see with the purple and the yellow. In the midst of is then what we see in Hilali Khan. In the valley of, we see in Maududi. It's different, right? Then Pickthall gives valley of as well. And then we see Yusuf Ali goes for the midst of rendering. It's not necessarily the case that just because there's ambiguity in exactly how they translate, that necessarily it means that there's a red flag there. There's more reasons for it to be a red flag. And we'll see that in a second. So this is the verse, and it's linked to the city of Mecca, and this is then understood in the context of 7th century events with Muhammad in Mecca, that's then the presumption that this is what the verse is speaking of. And what we'll do then, like I said, is we're going to just go through the verse step by step and render it how we would render it if it was Syriac. So the first word is simple. It is the same rendering as the Arabic, right? Wahua and wahua, it's the same. So we have, hua, yeah, exactly. So, and he. So this is, we start off, and he. Okay, we'll put that there and we'll work through as we go along. So the light blue, it's consistent, and he. This is then a little bit more speculative. This is the word alif lam, and then they have a dal, dh, and then a y. What it's translated into sin as who, but what jumps out to me very clearly is the fact that this is a word with a definite article. And we have other instances of words like this as well, where there's clearly a definite article. However, it's rendered as some kind of verb, or in this case, like a fixed propositional term, like who. So it's not that important for the sake of this verse, whether it's who or the enough or the sufficient. However, I'm leaning towards that direction because we have the dy form with just the d and the y in the Hebrew. Then in the Aramaic, this is very common for two radical roots in the Hebrew to then geminate the second one. So then in the Aramaic, it's dyy, which means then enough. And this is a little bit, say, complicated and stuff, but essentially, you have to notice there's this pattern in the Arabic orthography. When they only write two characters and not three, it implies a gemination of the second one. What I mean by that is that, for example, jinn, exactly. Jinn is written with just J and N after the alif lam, but that's corresponding actually to a root JNN. And it's other instances. What's more obvious one I can think of right now offhead? It's dropping from my head. But regardless, it's not that important necessarily what this word actually means. But we're going to put it for now as the sufficient, as a title for God, who is sufficient or. Yeah.
Just 1 second. No. On the next screen is yes, because the banner is actually covering up the rendering that you are doing, so nobody's seeing it. Let me just remove it. Okay, yeah, the rendering is down there. So as Kash is actually going word by word, section by section, he's adding them there at the bottom, which you couldn't see before. My apologies, but we are back on track.
Okay, thank you for that. So, and we're going to continue now. So, and he, the sufficient, although that's, like I said, not super important. Then we have this first word, which is kaf, and then fa in the Arabic, which corresponds to kaf pa in the Syriac. And this has the meaning of to bend, curve, or to bend, to distort, or arch, right? And we have turns of phrase like this in English, where like I curved you, right? Like this kind of terminology. So in that light, what we would have is bent, right? The sufficient bent. Okay, let's continue. This is then sin is correct on this. This is the word for their hands. So yadahu. Hum. Yeah. By the way, it's very interesting. The grammar for the Arabic text is it leans on Hebrew grammar. Although it takes the terminology a lot from the Syriac, it still leans on it uses Hebrew grammar rather than Syriac grammar for the suffixes and stuff. That's a point of interest. So their hands. So the bent their hands. This one I'm going to spend a little bit of time on because what I'm doing here is actually I am considering potentially that this word is actually a T rather than an N. So what we have in the hafs is that this is meant to be understood as Ain, Nun, Kaf, Mim. And of course, like we note very often, the difference between a Nun and a Ta or a Nun and a Ba, particularly when it's in the middle consonant, middle position. So it's not at the end of the word or at the beginning of the word. Or actually in the beginning of the word, it's also totally ambiguous. But so in the middle of the word, like in this instance, whether you have a T or an N is a matter of diacritics. And the Rasim didn't have diacritics in the beginning. So it's totally feasible, therefore, that you had a word form in the text, which is entirely up to whoever adds the diacritics in to decide whether they read this as a nun or a T. And looking around at possibilities of it being a nun or a T or a Y or a B, the only thing I could find that is actually attested and productive is the rendering of this form with the T. So I was exploring that as an option. And it seems in context, when I looked at the full verse, to be very compelling as a rendering. So this word is the Ain Ta. This has the meaning of to defraud, or to be fraudulent, dishonest, to deal fraudulently, So we see that in the Margolioth dictionary. This is for the Syriac here. And then on the bottom here, we see the same form attested in the Aramaic. This is from the Comprehensive Aramaic Lexicon online resource. Here we have the lexeme for the Syriac here. You can go and find that through that link. That's for this one here. So with that meaning, then with the suffix kum would be you, in contrast to ha-mim, which is then. So defrauding you or defraud you. That's then what I'll put for this. However, I will say that if we go with the nun rendering and not with the ta rendering, I found another option here. And that is to say that ein nun nun, which, like I said before, when you have in Syriac words that have a gemination of the second consonant, what I mean by that is to have like n twice, right? So like ein and then n, it's written in the corresponding Arabic in terms of how they use the orthography, simply as only writing one n. And it's essentially the idea is if there's only two consonants involved and it's written as, like, let's say ein nun, then it should be understood as ein nun nun. And then with the suffix would be you, so it would be cloud over. So both of these actually we'll see work. So, but the defrauding one, I'm leaning towards that one. Although with the cloud over, it'll work too. So I'm just putting this all out there as all these possible options that we could be dealing with. I'm not sticking super strongly to any one in particular necessarily, and we'll see why in a second. So we have this idea of defrauding you. So then this is then more deceit, knavery, villainy, depravity. This is back to the ein ta, right? And so then we put that in. So far we have and he, the sufficient, bent their hands, and I put in brackets from, but you can just say defraud you, right? So bent their hands from defrauding you. That's so far. Then we continue. And we have the same form again, but instead of their hands, it's now your hands. So same form, just different suffix, right? So your hands versus their hands. So we put that in here. So and your hands, and we have the same word form again. So it's either, like I said, it's either the defrauding or potentially this cloud over you. And then we'll put it in there from defrauding them. So and he, the sufficient, bent their hands from defrauding you and your hands from defrauding them. And this is where it gets interesting. This is actually what we're really concerned about. So these are the two words that matter. So we have this Makkah word. And like you said, this question, is it a city? It occurs once in the text. It's understood basically to be a transliteration proper name, even though orthographically it's well attested. And we'll explore that in the next slide. However, crucially, it's also important what the word is that comes before it. And this was the word that we saw translated as in the valley of or in the midst of. Murad translates it as in the belly of, and the reason Murad uses belly instead of something, let's say, more unspecific like valley or in the midst of, like that's radically unspecific, right, is because the actual word, the triradical root, is ba, tef, which is the emphatic T, and nun, with the prefix here of b, which means by, in, or through as a prefix. So that's why you see here by, and you notice very quickly the whole word here conceiving, because that's quite, draws upon Christian ideas there, doesn't it? So that's why presumably Murad found an attestation or a definition of belly, because belly, womb, conception, pregnancy, it's all conceptually tied together. But very crucially, this word is linked to pregnancy. It's linked to the womb. It's linked with to be with child, to bear child. And we see here on the lexicon, I always go with the Margolioth because this is a English lexicon. Otherwise, I would have to, translate from the Latin attestations and such. But regardless, so we see that in the Syriac, this word is a proper term to talk about to conceive. You can see here, to conceive, be with child, to bear child, and so forth. And we even see the word was conceived in her heart. So we can see how in talk about the incarnation, that this word is used in the Syriac textual tradition in the context of the incarnation, of the pregnancy of Mary with the word. So that's then this triradical root, to conceive. So then the question is, why do we see this idea of to conceive before the word for presumably a city, a proper name of a city? It's strange. So that's what we see here, in the valley of, or in the midst of, interior, but the Syriac is very clear that this is a word that means to conceive. And it's not just the Syriac. So it's also the Aramaic. So, and it's very, very well attested in the Aramaic textual tradition across from Qumran, which is the Dead Sea Scroll community, the Christian Palestinian Aramaic community, classical Syriac, Mandaic even. This goes all across the board. Everyone knew this term. This was across Syriac, Aramaic of different dialects, Mandaic even, right? Like it's all over the place. So, and the word is to become pregnant or to conceive, to be stuffed with, full of, to make pregnant, right? You can make pregnant, to cause conception, right? So this is the word that we see before the word Makkah, and this word has a be prefix, so it has a meaning of like by conceiving. So we'll plug that in then. So we see, and he, the sufficient, bent their hands defrauding you, and your hands from defrauding them by conceiving. And here's where it gets crucial. What is, therefore, this word that comes after? What is being conceived? That's then this word. So Makkah is written in the Rasam as M-K and then T. You see, if you look at manuscripts, I don't have them in here. There's this conflation that happens in the orthography where the Marbuta H and the Marbuta T essentially get conflated in the concept. Like basically, it's like, oh, they're ambiguous, even though originally they weren't actually ambiguous. The Ha was very clearly a circle, where the T was a circle with a little peak on the right side of the circle. I should probably have included that, but you know, we live and learn. So this is a root that I found from the Syriac side. So we're going to go through a lot of options here because I'm not planting my flag necessarily on any of them. You'll see very quickly, like all of them work, which might be a pun in its own right, to draw upon all of these different meanings. But so we'll see that the first one we have is this MKA. And the reason I'm considering MKA as valid here is because the Marbuta shape, if it is a his or if it's an H, for example, then it could mean, the way it works is if you have a root with MK Aleph and then you add the suffix H to it, the Aleph is a weak Aleph. So the Aleph actually gets dropped. So the final rendering of the shape to say his humility in the Syriac would be MK and Marbuta H. Right, so just as to make that clear here, so that's then this root from the Syriac to debilis, humilis. This is from the Latin, which I then translate. So we have weak, feeble, frail, powerless, or low, humble, of low position or station, modest. This is language that any Christian will be very familiar with. This is language we use to speak about our Lord's incarnation. And however, I put that first as the Syriac route potentially, but it's more clear and more explicit in the Aramaic. So that's probably what the text is drawing on in terms of the word. And we'll see very clearly, it's probably not super big, so I'll have to just read it. But so this is the Aramaic we have, which has the meaning of baseless, lowness. And then we see an example here. The hand of the mighty shall rule, while the deceitful become low. And here we see that it's used, this term is used in the Aramaic tradition, or actually rather in the Syriac tradition here we see, to refer to the human properties in Christ, right? The human nature of Christ, lowliness, humility. So this is used in reference to Christ explicitly in the Aramaic tradition. So either we would have potentially MK Aleph with the H rendering it as MKH. However, like I said before, from the early manuscripts, it does appear to be the case that this was written initially explicitly as a T and not an H suffix. So it's more likely that what we're looking at here is this Makata rendering here from the Aramaic, which has the explicit meaning of humility, and that fits right in. So let's plug that in then. However, actually, before we go there, this is a third option, and this is from the biblical Hebrew, where this word is used very often in the book of Exodus and stuff, this root, rather, to talk about plagues and so forth, but also it's used to refer to wound. And in the context of Jeremiah, I'm just going to read through the interlinear here really quickly. There is no one to plead. This is Jeremiah 30, verse 13 here. There is no one to plead your cause, that you may be bound up medicines healing. Have no you all your lovers have forgotten you, you not they do seek for with the wound. That's the important word here, makat, which is written exactly as we're seeing it in the Arabic with the mim, kaf, and then the tau. So this has then the meaning of wound. The thing is, obviously when I'm reading the interlinear here, it's not very easy to understand what's even happening here. However, I'm just going to skip forward and show you that this Jeremiah 30:14, that the church fathers saw this wound being spoken of in the context as being, well, first, it's on one level, it describes Judah's devastation by Babylon, punishment from God that looked like an enemy's blow. Second, it applies to morally, the soul and the church bear wounds when they forsake God for false lovers and the worldly supports and those allies abandon them in crisis. Finally, and most crucially, they read it as in a Christological sense that Christ himself took on the enemy's wound, enemy of course being Satan, right? In his passion, where he's abandoned, struck, and pierced, so that by his stripes he might heal humanity's incurable sickness, which is this distance that we have from God ever since the garden. And that would then hence fulfill the promise that from your wounds I will heal you. And those wounds then being the wounds on the cross. So potentially it's a pun. Potentially they're drawing upon just the Masoretic Aramaic, the Hebrew, or they're drawing upon the Syro-Aramaic attestation of humility. So it's drawing upon both, where it's linking the idea of the wound that Christ takes for us with his humility in his human nature, and how he truly did die a human death, which is then being conveyed here potentially. That being said, pick your pick. Whether it's talking about the wound being the passion, or whether it's talking about the humility of God in the incarnation, whichever way you go, in a Semitic context, this is talking about the incarnation or the crucifixion in one way or another. But regardless, it's talking about Jesus Christ. So we'll plug that in there, and we'll put his humility, because that's the one that's the most, let's say, requires the least amount of jumps. It's very well attested in the Aramaic explicitly. So we don't have to do too much work there, and we'll stick with the humility sense here, where basically I put his humility here, but you can also just read it as humility. By conceiving humility or his humility, it depends whether you go for the Syriac route or you go for the Aramaic route. That's why it becomes a bit, difficult. But yeah, we're just putting it out there as a white paper for now. So by conceiving his humility, we'll read it all again, so now we can maybe, get a gist of it. And he, the sufficient, bent their hands from defrauding you and your hands from defrauding them by conceiving his humility. And then we have the next part here, where we see from these two words together in the sin take on the meaning together as after. So they say min, and then this word means after as a joined grouping. However, like I said, we're just going to read it as Syriac, so we're just going to go with what the Syriac attests this combination of phrases to mean. So min means from. This is very classic. The Quranic Arabic also attests this in the sin as well. Then we have this bi, ein, and then dal. And this is attested then in the Syriac to mean remotely or far away, a distant, remote place. We'll see in a second, right? So from afar, we'll plug that in by conceiving his humility from afar. Okay? Where, this is Alif Nun, which is read all the time in the Quranic translation. It's read in many different ways, actually. It's read as if sometimes, that sometimes, which is not uncommon. That's not a red flag or anything. It's used in different contexts as a proposition also in the Aramaic. However, we have the idea of where, so we'll go with that one, just because that's the first one that pops up in the Surah Aramaic. So then we'll put where there. We'll continue. This one is interesting. This root here, so it's actually, the sin attests this as having the emphatic Z, which is a diacritic away from the teth, and I'm not convinced that there's really an organic emphatic Z because you don't find any other Semitic languages. It's an innovation, so it's quite suspicious. So for this, I went with the rendering of assuming it as a teth rather than this Z character that doesn't exist in the Aramaic or Syriac, so we couldn't look for cognates through that anyway, because it seems to be made up essentially. So this word form, it's crucial to understand the three aspects. The first aspect is the prefix aleph. The second aspect is the main root, which is this the teth here, teth, and then this is a P, and then this R. I don't know why there's an H here. Tahar. I think, yeah. There's an H here because the manuscript there's an H. Oh yeah, I realized this. So in the manuscript, it's very clear it's an H here, right? This is an H, but in the Sin, they put it as an F, which is funny. But anyway, so basically, I just went to the manuscript. I see it's an H, so I'm going with the H rendering, and I'm looking at the Syriac. So we have the Aleph prefix, which means I, and then do something. So I, and then the root meaning to be clean, and it's used as in the context of to be ritually clean, and to be declared clean, which is in the context of to be ritually clean and all that, right? So that's why I put ritually in brackets, because contextually the word clean is in the context of ritual cleanliness, right? The man became ritually clean, as you see here, right? Upsala, let's go back. So it would be that, therefore, I make clean, and then the suffix kum means you. So I ritually clean you. We'll plug that in then. And then we have the next word, which is it's actually the root for Ali, right? Which is interesting. So Ali means to exalt or to raise up. So above them, essentially, which is also what the Sin translates. They put over them, above them, very similar. So to exalt above, to bring up, to raise up above, to go up, right? So above them. We'll put that in then, where I make you ritually clean above them. This part I am very uncertain about because of this complexity of this kana word. It's translated in the standard sense as a root word to be or to exist, and therefore it's used in context of like was or is. I'm not confident on how I understand this word yet. I'm just going to put forward a couple options just based off the form. So as you can see here, it's actually the K Aleph Nun. However, I've seen in the context of the Quranic text, when they put an Aleph between two consonants, very often it's a placeholder for a two consonant root. And therefore, I was sort of playing with that option here. So I found kana as potentially, maybe being what it's referring to from the Syriac. However, there's a bunch of options for this, and I can't necessarily lean one way or another too strongly. So this is the reason why I was considering this as an option, even though it seems to be written differently, is because in the context of the Quran, we'll see this in another video, but there's this word, the sak. And this is in the Aramaic, the root is sin kaf aleph, and in the Hebrew it's sin kaf. So this is my thesis, right? So you have a two consonant root in the Hebrew that then comes into the Syriac and Aramaic in the form of adding an aleph at the end of it. So you can see here it's sin kaf, and they also have sin kaf aleph, right? So it pads the three consonants, right? And then in the Quranic Arabic, it seems to be the case that they pad it not at the end of the word, but in the middle of the word. So that's why maybe it's referring to house. However, this word is used so often in the text, we really have to look at like a bunch of different contexts when it's used to figure out what exactly it's pointing to. But so that's just like one of the potential options. Then I also in the Aramaic, I found this where we have the actual explicit form of, if I find it here, K Aleph Nun Aleph. So this one also has an Aleph at the end, which is a definite article, right? So righteousness as such. However, it's seen to mean to be just or honesty. So honesty, just, to be properly, let's say, to be fair, and with people. Okay, so that's maybe that. However, again, there's another word form in the Syriac, which is translated as a Latin word, which is to be first, or the one who takes first place. So there's a bunch of options here, and I don't know which one I go with. I'm just putting them all out there as options, as well as another one here. And this one I highlighted the vine word in it because, again, it seems like this is drawing upon the parable of the vineyard. That's why I think that if we're going to lean on anything, we should probably lean on the imagery of wine and vines. So this is the another form, KN again. There's so many different forms, and the nuance here is going to be the death of me, right? But so then we have the idea of a stem or the base or the source or the stalk, and that then takes on the meaning of the source of the wine is then the vine. So the vine could be the sense, or it could just be is or exist, but we'll leave it there. I'm just trying to run through this as best we can. Then we see the word Allah, which is just very simply God. There's probably more to this, but for now we're not going to go into the whole Allah question. And then we see ba ma, bi ma, which means by what. I'm just going to go through a couple here, and then by what. And then we have this word here, which has the prefix t, and it has the suffix un. Un as a suffix pluralizes, and the t suffix is u, which is interesting, by the way, because without diacritics, this can mean either you work or they work. Because if you replace the T prefix with the Y prefix, then it would mean they work. With the T prefix, it means you work. So that's why it's so difficult with this, because the text initially wouldn't even distinguish between you and they working, which is wild. So anyway, so then we'll stick with the rasam of the T, even though in context it feels like it should be a Y. We'll see that in a second. But yeah, so that's then this word is attested as to labor, toil, make trouble, weary, trouble not, to do work, to toil, labor, to work. That's then the meaning of this word. So we'll put it now as in our English gloss as you work. This word is crazy also. I'm not confident with this one. I have attestations that go all over the place. One of them, well, firstly, the Sin translation of it is all-seeing, which is one of these sort of title-style glosses that are given to the word. And it appears in different contexts in a sort of a formulaic structure similar to what we see in this verse. However, it seems like there's no real reason why it would mean all-seeing. Essentially, the root itself in the Hebrew, Aramaic, and so on has a range of meanings. Where in the Gez it has this meaning of to bring good news or to rejoice, and but primarily it has this meaning of to lessen or to worsen or to take away, which then we see here in this context, where it's written here without the Y, but the Y is anyway a conjugative, where you put the Y between the second and the third radical to make it about an agent who does that, or someone who is that, or something that is that. And the meaning then in the root form would be to take away, subtract, or lessen. So that's why I put here taken away or worsen as potentially one of the options here for this word. I also pulled up here in the Aramaic, this is the same root in question. I always made a point of highlighting anything that's related to vines in the attestation, because that's the imagery I see that is being drawn upon in the whole context of the verse. So to be stripped bare, or the glory departed and the vineyard was stripped bare. So this kind of imagery potentially, or to be demoted, to be unfit. It's all over the place. It's very difficult for me to make sense of how to read this word. So that's why the final sentence is a bit, I don't quite have a full rendering for that, but I'm going to put some more options here. This is without the Y. In the Hebrew, we have betzer. This is then has this meaning of gold or precious ore, but I also found in the Hebrew the form with the Y, which is interesting. Wow, it's related to vineyards again. This is how I'm trying to read the text, because it's difficult with all the ambiguity. But once you draw upon the thread that the author is getting at, then things start to work into place. Because if you have all these words that have these subtle meanings about wine or grapes or a vineyard or the vine itself, right, then it would draw a picture together and make sense for an intentionality, right? Basically, it seems like it would be too coincidental for that to be a coincidence, right? It seems intentional that that's the idea. So then this would actually have the meaning of vintage, which is used in the context of Isaiah 24, where it talks about when thus it shall be in the midst of the land among the people, like the shaking of an olive tree, like gleaning of grapes, when is done the vintage. So the vintage is done. So I don't necessarily know all of the details about the symbolism of vintage in the Masoretic text and how it's used. However, the imagery of wine and vintage. Well, vintage, the idea is that you leave the wine, right, and then you get the vintage. It completes. The vintage is then completed. It's like you need to be patient with the vintage, and in due time, it then culminates, right? You get you're patient with your wine. It ages, and then you have your vintage, right? Makes sense. So anyway, I left the last sentence as kind of all over the place in my rendering. I don't have a firm understanding of what to make sense of that one. However, we'll read then in the full context of what I have so far, just by looking at whatever the words would mean based on the Syriac, Aramaic, and Hebrew. And I read, and he, the sufficient, bent their hands from defrauding you, and your hands from defrauding them, by conceiving his humility, or simply humility, from afar, where I make you richly clean above them. What comes to mind, JC, when you have this idea of conceiving something from afar, where I make you richly clean above them? We'll focus only on conceiving his humility or conceiving humility from afar. What does that make you think of?
Well, yes, like much of the Quran, when there is something that looks odd, it's always so far, almost without exception, has been something to do with Jesus, with something very Christological, whether it is baptism, like we've seen before, or the cross, or crucifixion, or resurrection, or something very, very much about Christ. So here, even if any of the words, and maybe some of the words, even if they are not the correct thing, by looking at the Semitic languages, I think this looks like, yeah, they're hiding Jesus in this sentence.
Yeah, and the idea of to conceive from afar, or the word had also the idea of like remoteness or distant, in the context, like a distant hope in that sense, right? So to conceive from afar, right, where he's ritually clean above them, to me, this has the image of the conception in the, in Bethlehem, uh, far away from the religious institutions of the rabbinic Judaism, or it's before rabbinic Judaism, obviously, but like to be distant from the Pharisaical order and traditions, to be conceived far away, where he is ritually clean above them, or he is made ritually clean above them by God. So this draws to me the idea of the birth in Bethlehem, that kind of imagery, and hence that's why I have an image here where the AI unfortunately seemed to give Jesus some weird eyes, but oh well, we'll deal with that, right? So this is then the image I get of it being about this vineyard question and about inheritance, right? Because when we go back, when I gave the context about the vineyard parable, it was about this question about who is the heir, who inherits the produce from the vineyard, right? And then the heir is the son. He is then given, or he is then sent to collect the fruits of the vineyard. He is then killed in an attempt to defraud him of his inheritance. So that's why I was very compelled by the possibility of defrauding them as the proper understanding. And what's interesting here is it actually frames it in the sense, potentially, of a two-way question, right? It's not just that maybe the Gentiles, or let's say the non-Pharisaical types, right, that they, most specifically the Gentiles probably, but it's putting it forward as if you could potentially be defrauding them, and they could potentially defraud you, and in order to ensure that no one defrauds anyone, he sends his son, right? He sends the true heir, such that he dies, and then all are equal through him, right? So there isn't this status position about who's defrauding who and all this, but rather that God conceives his humility from afar, where he's ritually clean above them, and that then is related to this idea about the attempt to defraud God himself, right? To defraud God of the fruits of his vineyard. This is then the idea. What do you think?
Well, yes, by conceiving his humility from afar sounds to me more like simply sending the word down into the world. But we know that there are quite a few words in there that need to be investigated or clarified. Now, I'm going to play in a moment the section that Raymond Ibrahim actually said, because we need to talk a little bit more about the Makkah that is meant to be in the world and why there is a huge problem with that. But first, just to kind of summarize this thesis, is we know a number of things. This doesn't appear out of nowhere. We have seen already, and we have shown in many different videos, that there is a lot that is actually hidden within the text. And normally, everything points towards Christianity, like they were actually hiding those words on purpose. We have seen the Trinity, we have seen the Spirit, we have seen the Holy Spirit, we have seen the Shekinah, we have seen so much. So they are hiding stuff. We know that for a fact. Now, Makkah, it only appears once in the book. If we were thinking, hang on a minute, they are telling all of these stories about Muhammad in Mecca, Yathrib, all of those things, that should mean that the most important city is Mecca, so it would appear lots of times, but it only appears once, and that's a problem. Now, not only a problem because it doesn't actually make sense with the narrative, it should really be a city very mentioned everywhere in the book, and it isn't. That's one of the problems, but another one is that we know that the translators, they are embarrassed by it. Just like they are embarrassed by Muhammad not being in the book, only appearing 4 times, and then you go to the translations and you see, oh, Muhammad everywhere. they know there is a problem and they have to really persuade people that the text says something else. The same with Makkah. There is the verse that actually says Becca, and some of the translators, they will actually write Makkah in there. They will not even add brackets, and they will say Becca. No, that's Makkah. It's the same. It's the same. It's like, no, you keep saying these things. You say that Ahmad is the same as Muhammad, and therefore is the same. And then you see that Becca is Makkah, and then there are in other places where they will actually add in brackets Makkah, so that you know is the city. It's like, no, hang on a minute. Let's just wait a moment and just think about this. We know the book has been uh, really misinterpreted from day one. We know they are hiding a lot of Christianity in there. This has been a huge cover up. They have done that with the book. We have shown that countless times. Even the name of the book is a much later creation. So, and then we are looking for a city called Makkah, and it doesn't appear in the real world. That is a big problem. So it only appears that word once in the Quran, and then in the real world, everybody's trying to find the city, and it is not attested. So far, we don't know where that city was. Therefore, the question should be, hang on a minute, seeing as these people have been hiding stuff in plain sight, is it not more likely that the verse has been mistranslated and once again is hiding something? So that is kind of like the long and the short of the thesis. And like Cash has actually shown potential renderings, this is for people out there to actually now question this and go, hang on a minute, you're actually putting way too much Syriac into that. Those things here and here, they're actually Hebrew. Or you have made a mistake with these. These options are not available. They are these options. So we need people to actually look at that, because it might actually solve the problem of Mecca. If J. Smith is right when he says the book, the man, the place, and that those things were not really there in the 7th century because they are attested later, the next logical question should be, okay, so Makkah is not a city in the book, because otherwise it would appear in many places and we would have found it in the real world. Not only that, this is not the only case when this has happened. Like, this is very well known. The Quran says in Surah 17, verse 1, it mentions the Masjid al-Haram and the Masjid al-Aqsa. Now, the Masjid al-Aqsa was completed around the year 709. It was started to be built just before that time, probably still during Abdul Malik, so 705 or something like that. But it is in the book. So we have Masjid al-Aqsa in the Quran. So it appears first in the Quran because we have the manuscripts from before that was built. And then it's almost like they lifted that word from the book and then they created that place in the world, almost to justify that their book was telling stories that actually did happen right there. But Masjid al-Aqsa was not in the world. It was first in the book. And then they lifted it from the pages. What about the Masjid al-Haram? It looks like it's the same thing, because Masjid al-Haram, there is one inscription, or there was, I think, Jay Smith mentioned that maybe it's been destroyed, but we have the records, it's in the Islamic Awareness website, of an inscription outside of Taif that very clearly says the inscription was made in the year when the Masjid al-Haram was built, in the year 697. Of course, when you read the interpretation, what they are saying, the comments from the standard Islamic narrative, from the Islamic Awareness website, they will say, oh, this thing confirms that the Masjid al-Haram was rebuilt or refurbished or remodeled. And it's like, but the inscription doesn't say that. The inscription actually says that it was built in this year. So if that's the case, then now we have two things that appear in the Quran first, and then they are created in the world. So why would that not happen anywhere else? We have something similar with Yathrib. The Quran mentions Yathrib. We're not going to get into Yathrib, but then it keeps talking about Medina, 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 Medina. And then a city called the City of the Prophet appears in the world. Yathrib gets rebranded, renamed to the city. And I know it's the City of the Prophet. And it's like, guys, they actually changed the name from Yathrib to city. Okay? So let's just call a spade a spade. Those things are first in the book, and then they are lifted out of the book, and then they are created in the world. And those are not the only examples. There are other things, but these ones are about the narratives, like Makkah having the Safa and Marwa, which they don't actually match the descriptions. They are really trying to shoehorn everything back into that one place. but that place is actually not attested. So it does look very much like it is created as a result of that word appearing in the book, as opposed to, no, everything happened there and the book came out of there, but we cannot find it, and so on. And also with Mecca, we have actually looked at the artifacts found in the city. There is these two, I think it's called the Two Mosque Museum, or the Two Mosque Project, or something like this. So they have a lot of stuff in there. And you will see that there is a huge problem when it comes to Mecca. They have a piece of wood and also column, and they say these two things, they are from the Mecca, from the Masjid al-Haram when Muhammad was around. And then you have the black stone, and then you have the footprints of Ibrahim. And he's like, no. Hang on a minute. Are you saying that you don't actually have any artifacts, actual artifacts? You don't have any inscriptions, any vases, any utensils? You don't have any of those things. I have been to archaeological digs with Roman stuff, and they're absolutely packed. Cities are built upon cities. Even my hometown, every time that they just dig a little bit, they have to stop because they found something, and even nobody has heard of the city. So cities are built upon cities. You would have to then say, okay, so Mecca was there for a really long time. Nobody knew about it. And actually there are no artifacts because it's the tidiest city in human history. There are just too many problems. And the main one is we haven't found, despite of having so many people looking at this problem that is Mecca, they have not found the city. They have not found anything where you could say, here there was the Muhammad, the city was Mecca, and he thought that he was a prophet. There is nothing. Okay, let's look at the book. It only appears once. Is it mistranslated? I think the answer is solidly yes. The full answer, I would say, we obviously don't know exactly what this verse said, so the more people that can look at this, the better. But it sounds very much like they're probably once again hiding something Christological, probably something to do with the birth of Jesus or something of the sort. And here we are.
Yeah, to add to that, it's interesting because, so like I said in the beginning, we know that the word is there, and the question is does this word have history to it? And the question is, does the city have history to it? Because we're looking through the lens of the city. But if you just put that aside for now, that bias that it must be about a city that we get from the Islamic narrative, if you put that bias aside, then yes, it is a very ancient word, right? It's attested all the way back to presumably time of Moses, if we accept that that tradition is correct, which I do. Right, so this word is then attested in in Exodus. It has the sense of plague or slaughter. Then it has the sense of in the minor and major prophets. It has the sense of wound, right? And then it's interpreted by theologians and church fathers as being this wound is referring to the passion, right? So in that context, that Semitic context of the Near East in the 6th, 7th century, of course, people who were writing that term, they would know what it's referring to. Like like basically, if we're trying to find before the 7th century, where we have this textual tradition, where do we see this term, this word? We see it all over the place. It's not a term for a city. That's the problem. So, but once we put aside this bias, it must be a city that occurs one time in the entire text in a very vague surah that then is interpreted about being about some battle in their history. Right? If you put that aside, then it opens itself up to you. And then the fact that the word right before this one instance of Makkah is a word that means to conceive or get pregnant, then, and the fact that the word wound is seen to be referring to Christ, or the idea that the humility, we all know God humbled himself, so his humility is the incarnation, right? So theologically and thematically, it all points that direction, that this word is referring to something. And JC, you were saying like how it's mistranslated. The thing is, they don't even translate it, right? It's not a translation. They're not saying that Makkah means this or Makkah means this. They're saying, oh no, that's a proper pronunciation for a name of a city. But we don't see that evidence for that. So it suggests what came first, the chicken or the egg? I would put forward what came first is the word, not the city.
It certainly looks like that. And really, we are not trying to just shoehorn Jesus anywhere in the Quran. It's like, we have a problem here. Like, the city hasn't been attested. And if the city is out there, can somebody find it already? Because people are trying. And I'm actually very curious. I really want to know what happened in the 7th century in Arabia. But so far it looks like everything is not just a lie, it's a lie on steroids. It was actually built over a really long period of time, as opposed to, nope, everything is absolutely fine. Everything is like we've told you and like we've written it down. But trust me, bro, we don't have any evidence because evidence is haram. No, hang on a minute. It only appears once in the Quran. That should be a red flag. And they should have documents there. They should have actually archaeological finds, and they don't. So that's the thing. If all of that fails, we cannot actually find the original city in the world, and Mecca is not really attested in the Hijaz as they would really be able to demonstrate that. It's like, okay, so let's have a look and consider the word. And it really, really looks like it's going to be about Jesus. Kash, do you mind, should I actually play this very short video about Raymond Ibrahim, because he brings up a very important question as well about the historicity of Mecca?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's do it. Let me just do a couple of clicks here.
So Jay's point was that there is no attestation for Mecca, okay? As he was talking about Patricia Crone and everything she's done and shown, et cetera, et cetera. But doesn't that raise the question, why would these guys who are fabricating Muhammad create Mecca? Wouldn't the people living at the time of this very first generation where Muhammad is being fabricated realize there is no Mecca? Okay, I mean, doesn't this is what I mean, that the fact that there are question marks actually validates that this is authentic. Why would they do that? If there's no Mecca, as has been delineated right now, then why would I, if I'm fabricating a story, create a fake? Wouldn't I realize that people are going to have question marks and be like, where did this Mecca come from? This is what I mean by when I say, Fatima. Why would they trace it through a woman, a matriarchal line, which is not patriarchal like Arabs and so forth? All right, I'll stop there.
All right. Well, a couple of things. The Mecca thing of why would they actually then say invented? Okay, so the explanation in a second. The other thing about Fatima, well, think about this. If the whole story is fabricated as we believe that it is, at least for the most part, then you would have two guys that they are actually supposed to be the ones who can claim the throne. Let's just call them for now Umar and Ali. There could be somebody else, okay? Maybe there are other people, but they are the ones that we know. And many Shias says that the Sunnis actually worship Umar, and many Sunnis says that the Shias worship Ali. Okay, so we have two guys. Now, how are you going to join them? The second part, who are going to say, no, hang on a minute. So now we have this Muawiyah here who analyzed this other guy, but we still want to actually get the throne. We want to actually establish bloodline, basically like a monarchy. So what would you do? How can you join Umar and Ali, for example? You need a woman. You need a woman who establishes the line, the bloodline, because Ali is a nobody at that point. Except that the Shias, of course, then they say that he was created from the Nur and the Ruh and all of those things that happen later. But this is that established? It's like, no. That's why we need to figure out what the Quran says first. And then one step at a time, we move from the 650s to the 700s to the 750s and so on. These things happen over a period of time. Now we know that Quran itself as a word referring to the book happens much, much later. Okay, that's very good piece of information. Now we know that a lot of it is about Christianity. That's very good piece of information. We know that they couldn't chuck the book in the bin and then write a whole different story. The book was already popular. So that is a very good piece of information, and so on and so forth. So it's just about unpicking things one at a time, and there are obviously all of these problems. But no, we don't have a full answer for everything, hence why we continue, and lots of people are doing this. So that's one thing. Do you have any comments, Kash, about the Fatima thing before I say the other thing?
Well, also, I think that my suspicion is that the Fatima tradition comes from a memory of Mary. Like it's modeled after Mary. Not necessarily like the whole family dynamics. Your suggestion about linking these two traditions, that does also make sense. However, I want to point out that do you know whether Raymond was referring, because he said the first generation that's fabricating Muhammad, was he referring to like the 7th century necessarily? Or was it like, because from my position, there was no one in the 7th century fabricating Muhammad yet, right?
Well, I think, by the way, so Instagram has actually sent this. Raymond Ibrahim is now doing a debate review. It looks like it has actually been a popular thing. I think we are the first ones that actually got there, maybe. We just actually tried to get there before anybody else to review. And then it's actually going a little bit crazy. So I'll make sure that I actually watch that one. It's going to be interesting. Let's see actually how he feels about what happened, the things that were discussed and not discussed. So,
Wait,
Tash,
JC,
sorry,
just quickly, I'm going to try to put forward a possible explanation because Raymond was asking the question, right? If they fabricated, why would they fabricate it? And here is an option. The text exists. The text potentially is referring to the incarnation. The theology that needs to be read into the text by the people who read into it, they do not want to affirm the incarnation for whatever reason. And therefore, whatever the word and the whole verse in context is referring to, it cannot refer to the incarnation, but the text still is there. So it has to be read another way. So, therefore, you make it into a city and incorporate it into your traditions. Why do you choose Mecca? As in, like, literally the location in the Hijaz, right? Why would you choose that place? Like you were saying, there is no artifacts, there is no history, right? So if you're going to fabricate a city and place it back in time, backredact the whole tradition based on a city, you're going to place that city in a place where there's no history to contradict it. And like Jay Smith says, no water, no people, no civilization, no history, right? So this would be it really does make sense, actually. Like, you have the word in the text, it can't be read as what it really does mean in terms of the Semitic language, from the Syriac, Aramaic, and the Hebrew, etc. It has to mean something else, okay? So what does it mean? It means the city of our prophet.
right. So so when you this is what you have said, I think that is the answer, because you said you put it in a place where there is no artifacts and anything. There is something more important. There are no witnesses, because if you say, "Hey, do you see this city, Baghdad? Okay, now it's Mecca," people are going to say, "Hey, hang on a minute. Is it because of this book?" But these things that this book says, it didn't happen here. So you need to create an absolutely void place, a place where nobody can say, "Hey, hang on a minute, these things didn't happen." That's why it has to be an absolute creation from scratch, because you cannot have any witnesses. You cannot rename a big city and say that that's where those things happen. The locals will know. Hence why
Well,
it has to
they
be a
did,
place completely away from everything else.
but JC, they did do that exactly what you said with Medina. So
No. Yeah, but Medina is actually different. They renamed the city, but that said, they said, okay, so now we're calling this city how? City. And also, I think scholars say that these oasis cities, they would have only a couple of hundred people. So it would be a manageable thing from doing it in Yathrib than to actually do it in an actual very, very large city with lots of things. There is nothing going on in the Hijaz pretty much. So it would be manageable. But also, and now that you mentioned Yathrib, I think Yathrib is as well a component of it, because the Quran mentions Yathrib once, except that Murad doesn't translate it as Yathrib. He says actually it's a word in this case. I think there may have been these guys saying, okay, guys, so we have now created these, we're going to actually be building these things into pilgrimage places and so on. So what do we do? And someone gets the idea, hey, so this word here, Yathrib, well, there is a city called Yathrib. So let's go down there and actually create something. Mecca itself has to be completely out of the way, and Yathrib is a very, very almost um, weak place. You can actually probably manage it. That is what I would think is more likely to happen. But Mecca itself, it would have to be a place basically with no witnesses, because like Raymond Ibrahim says, why would they do it in a place like that? Because if you do it in a city with witnesses, you are going to cause some trouble.
yep, you put your fake city in a place where there's no history to contradict it, no witnesses, no history, no civilization. No one can go and say, "Hey, my family has been here for 10 generations. We know nothing about this Mecca," right? There's no one to say that because no one lives there. There's no history to contradict it. You've got free reign to fabricate whatever you want.
Exactly. It's like if I claim now that the oldest city in the world is actually in the middle of Antarctica. Go and prove me wrong, brother. You see the problem? It's like, what are you talking about? Yeah, trust me, bro. It's not attested, but but I know what I'm saying. Is yeah, it has to appear out of nowhere. Now, that being said, if we look at the map of Ptolemy, we see that there are actually lots of different cities and stuff. And Dan Gibson has found Yathrib and has found Najjar and all of those. It's possible that there was an actual original tiny city. I actually haven't checked how many people you can actually feed if you actually have one well, because that's the only source of water in that place. But probably just a very small group of people. It's possible that is actually the original city that was there. It was just a very tiny village, maybe just a couple of families, and it is in the maybe it is even in the map of Ptolemy, but that has now been wiped out and replaced with no, it's Makkah, and it was huge. So even though we keep looking at the maps and says, but where is Makkah? Where is Makkah? Maybe it's there. It's just that we don't know what name it had before, and I think that's possible, but very speculative, and we can ignore it. But I think the reason why they would create Makkah in a place that makes absolutely no sense is because it was the only way to have absolutely no witnesses of what they were doing. Right, Ash?
Yep, I would agree with that.
Okay, great. So I think this session, I thought it was going to be about 2 hours, but you really rushed through the pretty much all of the content. So that was great. And here we are at the end of it, just saying clearly, maybe the solution to the Makkah problem is that the word in the Quran was something to do with Jesus, and in the end, it became a city in the world. In order to prove that their book was divine, they start creating things, and Safa and Marwa as well, and all of these little things. So thank you everybody for watching. If it would be great if you have friends who are linguists and they speak Syriac, Aramaic, Hebrew, all of those things, and you send these to them and say, hey, these people are making an absolutely crazy claim that actually makes a lot of sense, because nobody has found Mecca attested before the Quran, and the Quran is full of lies. So that would be great. And if anybody
Well,
has
the
contacts
JC,
like that,
the modern reading is full of lies, right? That the text itself, on its own merits, it just is. And then the question is, how are you reading it? This is always the crux of the matter. And the pattern that we're observing, I'm observing in this in the work I'm doing. For example, just take the kind of a strange example of the mosquito, right? So it's like, why would that talk about a mosquito? It's like, why mosquito? You know, it's like, no, it's not about mosquito. It doesn't really matter what the actual word is read today. What matters more is what it actually meant under that reading, right? It's not that silly things just pop out of nowhere, but rather whatever was there that had to be read away, right? So for example, in the mosquito example, if you watch the live stream there, we saw how it was pointing to a root that means hardship, and it hence was talking about that God wouldn't shy away from creating an a likeness, an example, in his hardship, which is then again talking about Christ. So it's not the important thing is not what we're reading today. What's important is what was read, why it was read into it, right? So the pattern is when we see these cases, it's usually that it's referring to Christ, the incarnation, the sacrifice on the cross, his ransom for the sins of many, right? It's these ideas, these thematics in the verses where it appears that someone is radically reading into them such that they no longer read as they read.
indeed, and words from lots of things. Let's see if we can actually get people to have a look at this very specific topic as opposed to other things in the Quran which are less challenging. But seeing that Mecca is now being very popular, as it should be, and with Jay Smith now probably going to do other debates with Raymond Ibrahim, and I suppose that Mecca will be the next thing on the agenda. I think it would be quite beneficial if the world starts to consider that maybe the city was really fabrication, which the lack of evidence would support that, and actually looking at the verses in the Quran without the diacritics in the old manuscripts and say, hey, hang on a minute, this was telling a very different story. So hopefully that happens, and we will see how all of that evolves. For now, I think we're pretty much done. Kash, would you like to say some final words or any other remarks before we call it a day?
in due time, this white paper will eventually get polished and not peer reviewed in the sense of people looking at it, hopefully. And in due time, I would love to also revisit this. And once I have more concrete, let's say, interpretations of how to read it, then we can go and revisit that. But for now, putting this out there, hopefully it'll stir some conversation and maybe people will be starting to ask the right questions, hopefully. And thank you all for paying attention and listening and joining us, spending some time with us today. And we look forward to seeing you then on Friday, or Thursday rather.
Great. Thank you very much, Cash. And thank you very much, everyone watching. I hope that you actually really like this and this new perspective that actually it should be incredibly silly, but it sounds so incredibly correct that it's insane. So we will see you hopefully on Thursday. Maybe we do other streams, but it will probably be Thursday. We're trying to stick to that schedule. Until then, God bless you all. Stay well, and we will see you then. Bye-bye.
There is only one Quran, right? Every Quran in the world is the same. That's what you've been told. You have been told a lie!
26 of the Quran.
26 different Qurans!
There are 0 Dawa guys apparently left on the planet who are willing to defend Muhammad in a debate.
Everybody can go and read it. This is a book full of mistakes in Arabic, in the grammar, in the spelling, in the pronunciation.
Whoever wrote the Quran made an error because they didn't quite understand what was written in the 7th century in the Torah and the Injil.
As promised, I will give you more than 20 reasons why I left Islam in this video.
We know that stories about Muhammad were made up on an industrial scale.
What in the world is this Injil?